Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to The Week in Doubt, a podcast for atheists, agnostics, and whoever. And this is episode 35. Why do atheists like to talk about God? Before we start, I'd like to give a quick shout out to Nancy Billheimer for liking The Week in Doubt on Facebook. For a long time now, I've been looking forward to doing a Halloween episode, and that was going to be this week. But then I received a kind of thought-provoking response to the most recent episode of the podcast. If you don't already know, I'm in the habit of taking the old and current episodes of the podcast and repackaging them for YouTube. It's basically the same audio that you'll get through Podbean or iTunes, but then I'll just provide some simple graphics, like maybe just some cover art that informs the watcher which episode it is they're listening to and when it was recorded. And the most recent episode was the one I just did about Dr. Eben Alexander and his near-death experience. And I received the following response on YouTube. What is it with atheists always talking about the soul/God? For people who don't believe in such things, you guys sure do talk about it a lot. To me, it seems like atheism is nothing more than a grudge against theists. Like you guys were suppressed for so long that now you're allowed to talk about it, you're never going to stop letting them know how stupid their religion sounds. Imagine someone didn't believe in unicorns, yet they spend all their free time talking about it. Kind of weird, right? On top of that, well, it's funny, he had to do a second post, or I'm not sure if they're male or female, but YouTube, kind of like Twitter, only allows you a certain amount of characters, so he had to continue his thoughts in a second post. On top of that, videos like this make atheists look just as dogmatic and faith-oriented as any fundamentalist. You have NDEs showing, at least preliminarily, that consciousness perhaps survives physical death, yet all the atheists are either A, saying they're caused by the brain, which isn't grounded in science, or B, saying when it's all said and done, science will prove NDEs to be psychological responses. Atheists want to see the existence of God proven as much as theists want to see it disproven. And I think as far as YouTube responses go, that's actually relatively tame. For myself personally, I haven't really been attacked on YouTube yet or had anyone hurl epithets or make derogatory comments or anything like that. When people have been critical of me on YouTube, it's probably similar to what I just read. It's critical, but they stop short of hurling insults or anything like that. And I actually welcome that type of comment. I understand by doing a podcast, I'm taking part in the public forum or exchange of ideas. And it would be quite unrealistic of me to expect everyone to agree with me or expect every response to be kind of happy and shiny and laudatory. I think, though, his criticism, his or her criticism, was unfair in some respects, but simultaneously, I think it housed a very interesting idea. The person brought up the idea of why do people who claim not to believe like to talk about God and spiritual matters so much? And I think it's actually an excellent question. And he brought up the example of unicorns, which I thought was funny. Obviously, the person's not aware of my love of mythology. Kind of brought up how it would be ironic or strange, say, for someone who didn't believe in unicorns to talk about unicorns all the time. But as someone like myself who's enamored with mythology, I love to talk about fantasy and myth and things I know aren't true, but maybe are thought-provoking and have some kind of symbolic value at least. And I can't speak for all atheists, But for me, I think it's relatively easy to understand why someone, be they a believer or non believer, would want to spend a significant amount of time talking about or contemplating spiritual matters. After all, I don't think that the devoutly religious should have a monopoly on the discussion of such matters. Life's big questions, why am I here? Is there, isn't there a creator? Is there, isn't there an afterlife? Those big questions affect all of us, believer and non believers alike. These are existential questions I think we all think about from time to time, and that preoccupy some of us more so than others. Some of us might only wrestle with questions like this, say, when we experience a loss or some traumatic event. Than others, people like myself, have a kind of long-standing tendency to wrestle with life's big existential questions. And I think it is possible, and if you're a regular listener, then you probably realize this about me. I think it's possible to have a genuine love for, a fascination with religion and the history of religion without being a believer. As I've mentioned on the show numerous times, I was raised Roman Catholic. I'm probably a person who's rather philosophical by nature, and I can remember all the way back to early childhood wondering about the nature of reality, wondering about how do we know if there is a God or if there isn't, where do we really go when we die. I remember drawing parallels between the way adults talked about Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and these kind of imaginary holiday figures, and the way that they talked about God and Jesus. There's the same kind of making things up as they went along type of thing. How can Santa Claus fit down the chimney? Well, maybe he takes a pill that makes him shrink and fit down, or, maybe he has some kind of magical power that allows him to fit where he shouldn't fit. How can God be three people at once? Well, it's strange that I would use the example of the Trinity, because for an atheist, I have kind of a mystical bent in a way, which I know is a contradiction. In a weird way, I kind of get the idea of the Trinity. I get the idea of three things united as a whole. But I was just using that as an example of how, both in the case of these kind of mythical holiday figures and, say, God or Jesus, I would find that adults would use a similar tone and have to kind of fly by the seat of their pants and do their best to explain how these beings that you really can't prove exist, how they operate. But I'm an artist of sorts, and I've been sketching and drawing since I can remember. And I was always fascinated by mythology, by monsters, dragons, stuff like that. And I was drawing things like that from an early age. And I think that love of mythology, plus my philosophical inquisitiveness, eventually led to a fascination with world history and the history of religion. So I think my interest in these things was kind of twofold. On the one, it was just a natural fascination. I really just loved studying religion and mythology and ancient history. And secondly, it was about a quest for the truth. I wanted to try to find out for myself if the claims to various religions were true. How did these religions, apparently man-made, evolve over time? And like I said, I don't think there's any bigger question or questions you can ask yourself than, why am I here? Is there really a creator? Will my consciousness, will my self continue after my body dies? These are profound questions, like I said, that all of us will probably wrestle with to some degree. Then you have the strange people like me that tend to wrestle with them all the time. When I was younger, that was a source of angst. It was as if my well-being depended on being able to prove that there was a God or that there was an afterlife, because if there wasn't, then life would have no meaning, and the universe would just kind of be like this cold, mechanical, empty nightmare or something like that. We're all doomed to kind of exist oh so briefly without meaning and then get snuffed out into oblivion like a candle. Um, but the older I get, the more comfortable I get with the idea of my own mortality, with the idea that we, like most everything else in the universe, are transitory, and that things are subject to change, things are subject to extinction. And somehow, I can't really explain how, but I've come to accept that. And I think that life can be rich, life can have meaning without needing to believe that you exist forever. And I can't say that I know for certain that there isn't an afterlife or that there isn't a creator. But for me, trying to find the answers to these questions is like an itch that needs to be scratched. And I think I can actually empathize with believers who don't want to hear the thoughts of atheists because they find them disturbing. They find the idea that there may not be a God, there may not be an afterlife, quite unsettling. And I can definitely empathize with that, because I was in that place myself for a long period where I had doubts for a long time, but at the same time, I wanted to be proven wrong. It was kind of the worst case scenario for me, that if someone could prove there wasn't a God or there wasn't an afterlife. I found the idea quite disturbing. So I can understand why theists resent atheists. If you can even call me an atheist, it all depends. I've talked about labels a lot on this show. It all depends how strict you are about the etymology and the interpretation of words. I guess by dictionary definition, or if you insist on strict interpretations, then an agnostic would be someone who doesn't know if there's a God. Gnostic from the Greek gnosis, knowledge. And an atheist would be someone who doesn't believe that there's a God. But I'm not sure how strictly we should stick to the etymology of, say, a word like agnostic, when it was basically coined by T.H. Huxley, a proponent of Charles Darwin. And it was kind of like, Penn Jillette calls it a weasel word. It was kind of like a softer, more palatable alternative to atheist. And I think there is an overlap, as I've said before, between atheist and agnostic. An agnostic says they don't know if there's a God, and an atheist, at least a reasonable one, and most atheists I've encountered seem to be fairly reasonable, wouldn't claim that they know for certain that there isn't a God. I think they would claim more that their sense of reason and what they see as a lack of evidence leads them to strongly doubt the existence of God, or at least certain concepts of God, because certain concepts seem man-made. But so a religious person might ask, well, why, if I get that my ideas could be offensive to religious people, why am I doing this podcast? Well, first and foremost, I think my motives for doing the podcast are admittedly selfish. Everyone likes to be heard. Everyone has a desire to communicate to some degree. We're social animals. So the podcast allows me a platform from which I can express myself, kind of crystallize my own thoughts, listen to myself speaking. It offers me an outlet for my own ideas and musings on the subject of religion and atheism and things like that. I think I've said half jokingly a couple of times how also part of the impetus for doing this show was I would watch YouTube debates, say, between some of my favorite atheist thinkers and notable theists or Christian apologists. And sometimes I'd feel like maybe the guys on my team, so to speak, would maybe fumble a little or drop the ball, and I would think to myself, kind of like an armchair quarterback, if I was there, I would have said this. I wouldn't have let that go. And this podcast allows me a platform to express those ideas and to add my 2 cents to the conversation. And it's definitely not my idea to try to use the podcast to try to create more atheists, to try to convert people to atheism. That's about as far from my intention as can be. And that's why from the get-go, I made the tagline for the show, a podcast for atheists, agnostics, and whoever, because I try to be respectful. So I think my hope is that if you're an atheist listener, maybe it'll give you some solace to hear the thoughts of a fellow non-believer, or to hear your own thoughts being echoed by someone else. And maybe if you're an agnostic or you're on the fence, I can give you some food for thought, or you might be able to listen to me and say, oh, that guy makes some good points. And if you're a religious person, I guess my hope is that you'll find me respectful to some degree at least, and that maybe even if you disagree with me, you'll at least maybe enjoy the subject matter and find it intellectually stimulating. So it's definitely not my intent to convert anyone. I'm hoping that it's a show in general for people who are interested in religion, philosophy, people who know what it's like to wrestle with the big existential questions. And my hope, I think I would actually feel guilty if I thought I was responsible for robbing someone of their faith. And I think that's overestimating my abilities. I don't think I have that power. At least I hope I don't. I know there are conversion stories or deconversion stories out there about people who maybe read the works of Dawkins or Hitchens, two people who I greatly admire, and then that was kind of the catalyst for them moving from maybe being a wavering theist or agnostic over to being an atheist. I think I would actually feel somewhat guilty if I thought I was if my show was the nail in the coffin for someone, and cause them to close the door on religion and cause them to fully embrace atheism. My goal is, as I just stated, to one, selfishly indulge myself by giving myself a platform to express my own thoughts and views. Two, hopefully to offer some kind of camaraderie and entertainment to fellow non-believers. And then three, if you're a theist or a believer, I don't want to strip you of your beliefs, but hopefully, as I said, I can offer you a show that you might find intellectually stimulating, or at least you'll enjoy listening to someone talk about subjects you're interested in, like religion, even if the host is coming at it from a skeptical or non-believing viewpoint. But I did think, back to this YouTube criticism, I did think they were unfair to me in some ways. So I already explained why an atheist or a non-believer might spend so much time, to quote the person, always talking about the soul / God. Or why someone who didn't believe in unicorns would spend all their free time talking about unicorns. You can be fascinated by religion, the paranormal, mysticism, and not be a believer. And like I said, all of us, skeptics and believers alike, I think, to some degree are desirous of the answers to life's big questions. And as far as, the person says, it's like as if I, or atheists in general, were suppressed and now we don't want to shut up and we want to keep letting people know how stupid their religion sounds. My goal isn't to make people feel bad or rub their noses in what I see as their own gullibility for believing in, what I think are obviously man-made constructs. For me, it's just like I said, it's an outlet for me to express my thoughts and views, and say something like, a lot of times on the show I've beaten up on, say, Scientology and Mormonism because I view them as evident hoaxes. We can look at Scientology and we can see how it's a religion constructed by, to put it not so nicely, a drug-addled science fiction author. We can look at Mormonism, and we know that Joseph Smith was a known con man. And we can see how his claims about, say, Native Americans being a lost tribe of Israel and things like that just don't make historical sense. So I guess for me, when I see people believing in things like that, to me, it's kind of an insult to human intelligence. I don't know how people can do it, even when trying to be as objective as possible. I mean, these things just seem like hoaxes to me. They seem like absurd man-made stories. I don't know how people can give themselves over to them. It seems a betrayal of human reason. And sometimes, it makes me want to pull my hair out. And so this is an outlet for me, a kind of therapy, I guess, in a way, or catharsis. But would I feel bad if I knew a Mormon or a Scientologist was listening and I had hurt their feelings, or I had outraged them, or made them feel like their beliefs were being insulted? Yeah, I'd feel bad. But I guess to me, when I'm behind the mic and I'm bashing Mormonism or Scientology, first and foremost, this podcast is dedicated to my search for the truth and to trying to suss out truth from superstition or truth from falsehood. And I know I do have a double standard of kind of taking it easier on some religions like Buddhism and Judaism, and being harsher on other religions like Mormonism and Scientology. But I don't see that trend stopping anytime soon, to be 100% honest. And as I always say, and it might not completely make sense, it's hard enough to believe in religions that are a couple of thousand years old. Maybe in a sense you could kind of say they're kind of grandfathered in, or because they're so old, maybe they have some kind of patina of validity. Even though if you were to examine their supernatural claims, they really don't make any more sense or can't be proved any more than, say, the supernatural claims of these relatively young religions like Scientology or Mormonism. On where he continues and he says, on top of that, videos like this make atheists look just as dogmatic and faith-oriented as any fundamentalist. And I think what's perhaps erroneous with that accusation as it pertains to me is that I usually try to go out of my way to play devil's advocate against myself, or to emphasize the fact that I don't know for certain whether there's a God or whether there's an afterlife, but then I lay out my reasons for why I tend to doubt those things. Or even in the case of NDEs, near-death experiences. Oh, here he says, you have NDEs showing at least preliminarily that consciousness perhaps survives physical death. Yet all atheists are either A, saying they're caused by the brain, which isn't grounded in science. Well, stop there. The claim that NDEs are rooted in the brain isn't grounded in science. In a way, I think it is grounded in science. Because as I've said time and time again on the show, one of the main reasons why I doubt the existence of an afterlife or an immortal soul is because I think it's quite evident that, at least to me, and I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical doctor, but it seems evident to me that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. We know we have this extremely complex organ, the human brain, with all its various evolutionary layers, and we know that different parts of the brain are responsible for different aspects of cognition, memory, emotion, impulse control. And we know if certain regions of the brain become damaged, that it affects the personality or the individual's ability to function. So say if someone's brain becomes affected by senile dementia, we can see the damage to the physical brain And in correlation, we can see the erosion of the personality or the memory. Damage to the frontal lobe can lead to problems with impulse control, or it can erase certain aspects of personality. A brain surgeon could press on certain areas of the brain and get certain responses. So it seems to me that we know there's a direct correlation between the meat brain, to put it crudely, and personality and consciousness. Is it possible that maybe the brain is just some kind of temporary housing or vehicle that consciousness uses to communicate in this realm or this existence? Maybe it is a possibility, and I'm open to that. But that type of point of view, I think, involves a whole lot of speculation. And I guess going with Occam's razor, the easiest explanation, seems to me that we know that there's a direct correlation between the physical brain and personality and consciousness. And thusly, it seems to make sense that consciousness is an emergent property of the brain. Could I be wrong? Sure. Although it seems undoubtedly that consciousness needs the brain to operate in this realm. Could consciousness somehow exist after the death of the brain? Maybe. And I've stated on the show numerous times that I think it needs to be further investigated, and whether or not consciousness can survive the death of the brain, I think, is one of the most important questions we as humans can ask and can research, and we should. And I even stated in this, I don't know if this individual listened to the whole episode or not, but I even stated near the end of the episode that I hoped Dr. Eben Alexander would continue researching the phenomenon of the near-death experience, and that I thought that it did merit scientific investigation. At the end of the day, am I a skeptic? Do I think that maybe his experience, rather than occurring when his neocortex was non-functional, do I think maybe it occurred, say, on the way out, so to speak, when he was returning to consciousness and when his brain was kind of, to quote Sam Harris, going back online again? Probably. And I was just reading last night that Sam Harris has, I've talked about Sam Harris before, and if you're an atheist or agnostic and you're listening to this show, you're probably already familiar with Sam Harris. He's one of the quote-unquote new atheists. He has a degree in neuroscience. He's written popular atheist tomes such as The End of Faith and I believe The Moral Landscape. And he's come out and offered his criticisms of Dr. Eben Alexander. Medically speaking, Dr. Eben Alexander is probably the more experienced of the two. I believe Sam is a neuroscientist and Dr. Alexander is a neurosurgeon who's taught at Harvard for years. So medically and academically speaking, I'm willing to concede that Dr. Alexander is probably more knowledgeable than Sam, or at least has more medical experience. But I think Sam also knows a great deal, but more than I'll ever know, about the human brain, about neuroscience. He's also studied altered states of consciousness, things like meditation. And I think there was some kind of invitation extended to Sam Harris to debate Dr. Alexander, but Harris hasn't accepted, or he's rejected the offer. And I would absolutely love it. I think that would be, whether you're a believer or non-believer, that would be such an exciting debate. And I think it would be an important debate for the sake of science, too. I would love to see that. So I hope Sam Harris rethinks that. And even though Dr. Alexander might be more experienced medically, I think Sam would be able to make some really rational points. Because at the end of the day, although, as I said in the episode, that a Harvard neurosurgeon would be a proponent of the validity of near-death experiences, caused me to shake in my boots a little as a non-believer. And I think it should give honest non-believers pause. But at the end of the day, it's still an anecdotal story. We don't have any evidence. All we have is his story, which I think we should take seriously, and we should try to investigate it and get to the bottom of it and see if the doctor's claims, not saying he's being insincere, but see if his claims that his near-death experience must have occurred while his brain was virtually completely shut down are true, or if it could be the case that, this was such an emotional experience for him that maybe he is a little blinded or biased despite the fact that he's a neurosurgeon, and maybe this experience did happen as he was either losing or regaining consciousness and not while his brain was shut down. I think that should be investigated. And I am willing to leave the door open to the possibility that there may be life after death. And if someone could prove it, that would be absolutely mind blowing. And yeah, I mean, I do have a lot invested in this whole non-believer thing. I've been doing it for a while, but first and foremost, my kind of religion and, what I approach with an almost religious zeal or seriousness is the search for the truth. And that's what comes first and foremost. And if someone could prove that there's an afterlife, or if there was, that would be very exciting. And maybe it would even heal those early childhood wounds, when I started to lose my religion, not to quote REM. And when I really started to first doubt that there was a God or an afterlife. So I'm open to the idea that there's an afterlife, but I don't want to give in to wishful thinking. And I want to see some credible evidence and not just kind of warm, fuzzy anecdotes that can't really be backed up empirically. But I think I've gone on about that enough. This has been the second episode where I've really talked about the near-death experience of Dr. Eben Alexander. It almost sounds like the name of like an old Gothic short story, maybe a Lovecraft story or something. The Strange Case of Dr. Eben Alexander. But I guess what I resent the most about that YouTube response was that the person seemed to kind of generically lump me in with all atheists or all non-believers. And they accused me of doing what I try to be very diligent about not doing. And that's being dogmatic, or to quote them, faith-oriented. I always try to play devil's advocate against myself. I always try to admit my own bias or biases, and I try to root them out as I go. And I try to be as honest as I can with you, the listener, and myself as I can be, because the search for the truth is very important to me. And for me, as for a lot of non-believers, I imagine, we even have trouble with the label atheist, because once you label yourself, you kind of start to confine yourself. You kind of limit yourself to this box. I think there's a rightful fear that if you start to wear this label, there's the chance that you may start to become dogmatic. And it's something that all of us should stay vigilant of. I think whether you're a believer or non-believer, just as human beings, we should try to be as open-minded and objective and reasonable as possible. It's almost as if the person accused me of that. I have this pet peeve of when people say that atheism is a religion too. And I think it might have been the first or second, maybe the second episode I ever did, or maybe it was the first one, where I was talking about how when the former MTV VJ Kennedy made an appearance on the Bill Maher show, and it drove me nuts when she said to Bill that atheism is a religion too. And Bill, I thought, properly responded by saying that was so shallow or whatever. And I think that's true. Atheism is, at least ideally, is more the absence of religion than a religion unto itself. Embracing a religion involves putting faith in the existence of a deity whose existence can't be proven. It usually entails embracing certain supernatural claims that can't be proven. Whereas atheism is basically saying my sense of reason leads me to doubt, and I'm requiring some empirical evidence. Yeah. And that doesn't sound like a religion to me. That sounds like reason. It sounds like someone trying to get to the truth empirically. And there might be different types of truth. Sometimes people speak about a higher truth or moral truths. But for me, when I talk about the search for truth, I'm talking about empirical truth. Either there's a God or there isn't a God. Either there's an afterlife or there isn't an afterlife. And I'm just saying, before I say I believe in those things 100%, I would like some empirical evidence. I've got this one life and I want to know what's true and what isn't. So I think that's just me being a rational, logical human being and not being the adherent of some dogmatic religion. But anyway, I'll leave you with all that food for thought and I'll call it a show for now. As always, this has been The Week in Doubt. You can listen or rate the show or subscribe through either iTunes or Podbean. You can like the show by going to the Week in Doubt Facebook page. If you want to get in touch, you could leave a comment on one of the YouTube videos. You can message me through Podbean. And also, although I don't check it much, I did also create the Week in Doubt at gmail.com just so I could create a YouTube channel for the show. So you can also do that. I don't check it very often, but you can try to email me at theweekindoubt@gmail.com or leave a message on Facebook or through Podbean. Hopefully I didn't spend too much time complaining this episode, but as always, thanks for listening.